hot, dense state that nearly 14 million years ago expansion started. Wait, the earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall. We built the pyramids, math, science, history, unraveling the mystery that all started with a big bang.
Okay, so we're not going to watch Big Bang tonight, so yeah, okay. So you've come for our series that we're starting tonight. This is part 1 of 6. Hopefully you guys can stick it out. We're going to cover a lot of really interesting things. Evolution, have you ever heard the other side? And one of the things that I've noticed is in conversations with people, even people that are like science majors or whatever, is that often they've never really heard a factual-based, scientifically based presentation that challenges kind of the institutional message of Darwinian evolution, that it's a fact, it's non-negotiable, and this kind of thing. So that's why we put this out there. Have you ever heard the other side? And so many people have really never heard the other side. And a lot of people really would like to hear the other side. And so that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to make every attempt to do that tonight. Just to give you a little bit of background going into this, I'm also the pastor of this church. So I know a lot of you, I know a number of people that are guests here. And you're going, well, what does this have to do with theology? And I mean, there is obviously a theological component when we talk about creation and evolution, that kind of thing. But what I kind of want to, I have a college degree in geology. So, well, how do you end up being a pastor of a church with a degree in geology? Well, it rhymes with theology. And so that's how I, the connection is better than that. But really and truly, I went to Stephen F. Austin State University. That's actually a real picture of me. It was a long time ago, and I took 50 hours of geology at the time, which is quite a bit for a major. I had a minor emphasis in soils and cartography, another 20 hours there. So kind of earth science related, 70 hours of college credits. I've taken some postgraduate courses, but not science, more conflict management, things like that, practical things. But I want to kind of make sure everybody understands that as we're going into this, that part 6 we will have a Q&A. It doesn't mean we can't have conversations after the meeting and that kind of thing, which I love doing. But I really want you to kind of keep track, take notes, and write down questions as we go, because it'll be hard by the time we get to part 6 to say, oh yeah, what was that thing back at part 1 that I wondered about? But we'll devote a lot of time to Q&A on part 6. So just keep that in mind. This series will demonstrate the scientific implausibility of Darwinian evolution. That's our objective. And I believe that we can establish the case fairly solid. It's the theory of universal common descent. That is Darwinian evolution. So I'm going to start out actually with a discussion tonight. And so Adlai is going to run a microphone around, and just brief answers if you would. Throughout your life, through what sources of media, programs, or educational means have you learned about evolution? Can y'all comment?
I learned it from Evolution. Have you heard the other side?
Somehow I knew he was going to say something like that.
I learned it from the show called Heroes.
Oh, really?
Various teachers and science textbooks through mandatory school.
The Animal Planet channel.
Ah. I watch that channel a lot. I watch Lone Star Law. And they never say anything about evolution. Okay. No, I know.
Bill Nye the Science Guy and the Smithsonian Museum.
Okay, Bill Nye. I loved Bill Nye in the day. Not so much now. But I always remember this one lesson from Bill Nye. The brain is folded so it'll fit. The brain is folded so it'll fit. And it just stuck with me ever since. Okay. my kids, anyway. So like I was sitting around watching Bill Nye. But I would watch it because my kids would watch it. I'd watch it with them. Well, I appreciate y'all's responses. I thought about it, and I thought, really, don't we get information from movies? Don't we get information from television shows? Maybe, news outlets, museums, National Geographic, Discovery Channel. I actually had Bill Nye on my list. High school, college. You know that the longer that people go through the educational process, the more Darwinian they become. Isn't that interesting? Literally you can track it. The further they go through the educational system, the more kind of convinced they become. So we're going to cover a lot. We're going to look at why evolution is scientifically bankrupt. We're going to look at intelligent design. Actually, I'm going to look at that tonight. We're going to look at evidence from 3 branches of science that would include physics, biology, and genetics, and geology. We're going to look at the fossil record, the age of the earth. We're going to look at different types of time clocks, time and the speed of light, ice age, evolution of man. Is there evidence that dinosaurs were ever alive at the same time as men, human beings? Evidence for the global cataclysm related to the Noah's flood. And then we'll have questions and answers at the end. And then we'll have a whole lot of stuff in between. So one of the things I want to look at, I'm just going to pray a moment as we kind of go into this now with a lot of detail. And by the way I approach this, there'll be times when you're going to feel like I'm way beyond you technically, and that's okay. And so it's a real mixed crowd. And so I want to be able to put things out there to satisfy some of the real science guys that are out there, some of the scientifically minded people. And at the same time, I want to try to bring it down to a layman's level. So it's actually quite a challenge to do that, to kind of bring information in such a way that there's something for everyone. But there'll be times when I am going to get pretty technical, especially next week and the week after. But just hang in there. You may be absorbing more than you think. And so let's pray. Father, we just thank you for your presence tonight. We can sense that you're here. And we trust that the Holy Spirit, who is the Spirit of truth, will be here to speak among us. That, Lord, you would affirm the truth. You would affirm the facts. You are the creator. You are the designer. You're the one that's behind it all. And so we look to you for the witness of your Spirit as the one who created all of us. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. So let's look at a few current trends. I think this is a little bit of an older poll. It really was hard to find information on this particular survey, but that is how many people actually support teaching in public schools, for instance, creation or some form of intelligent design side by side with evolution. And so in 2013, it's a little bit old, but 40% at that time supported intelligent design, or what's referred to as ID by many, or creation of some form taught side by side with evolution. So 40% supported at that time. 37% of Americans said no, they don't want them together. They just want one side, and 29% were unsure. 2019 Gallup poll says that, and this is really fascinating, it says 22% say that humans evolved, but God had no part in the evolution. Okay, so 22% would basically believe in an atheistic view of evolution. Doesn't mean there's 22% that are atheists. That's just how they choose to believe the science as it's presented to them. 33% believe that humans evolved, but that God was somehow a part of the process. Those would be theistic evolutionists. They believe God's involved, that evolution couldn't have just happened entirely on its own, that it needed help. And so that's that group, 33%. And then 40%, which is really, to me, a really remarkable number. A lot of stubborn people out there that despite all the systematic indoctrination and immersed in a culture that's continuously pumping one view at us, 40% believe that humans were created in their present form. So, 40%. Americans, what do they believe? 33% of scientists say they believe in God. That's really low. All right, so 33%, but if you broaden that question and say, and a higher power, it goes up to a big number, 51%. 51% of college professors believe in God. In other words, they answer the question, do you believe in God? And they say yes. But if you add to that, do you believe in God or a higher power, then it goes up to 71%. When you get to doctors and physicians, when this study came out, it really surprised people because they were really somewhat shocked that physicians and doctors believe in God to the extent that they do, and that is 76%. 76% of doctors and physicians, when asked the question, do you believe in God, said yes. So, and then what about all the rest of us? Just the regular rank and file American, 87% say they believe in God. So to me that's fascinating. We're going to actually reference back to this later, but Genesis 1:1, this first verse of the Bible, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. What a simple statement. But it's a profound statement. Because if that single statement can be undermined or our confidence in that single statement can be challenged, then it will undermine our entire view of the Bible, which would include Jesus, it includes the claims of Christ, it includes everything in the Bible from that point forward. Because once you challenge that did God indeed create the heavens and the earth, that the heavens and the earth came through some other non-theistic means, then the Bible then at that point you'd have to discard it. And that's what a lot of people are doing. Because after so many have been kind of indoctrinated with this idea that God really was not necessary for the creation of complex biological systems, that then why is there a reason to even hold to the Scripture at all? Once you buy into that Genesis 1:1 is not really true, or it puts a serious doubt in the hearts of individuals that it's not true. So I have a notable thought. This is kind of me quoting myself, but it's actually me trying to put my thoughts together. That's actually me with a rock hammer, and I was piggybacked on a Del Mar geology class a number of years ago, back in 2009, and went to a fossil dig, and it was really, really cool. I got some really cool fossils from this particular dig. But undermine this single verse, Genesis 1:1, and we undermine the credibility of the entire Bible. How we see Genesis 1:1 has an enormous impact on how we understand the questions of where did we come from, who are we, and where are we going. It affects how we view ethics, civil and moral law, and even the founding principles of the United States, and really the whole of Western civilization. So it's really important. Have you ever heard the other side? And you know, a lot of you here are probably believe in creation, believe in God, as maybe to some extent rejected, at least have rejected atheistic Darwinism. I do have them come to these seminars on the occasion that I do them, but it's a bit of an endurance for the skeptic to go through a seminar like this, even though they, just to give it a fair shot. So Romans 1:20 from the New Testament says, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened." I want to just zero in on that text, that part that I highlighted at the top. It's a profound statement, because what the Apostle Paul is saying here is that man, without the Bible, without ever hearing a preacher, having heard the message of the church or anybody else, he's saying that just the witness of creation, the design, the features, the profound nature in which the created world exists, that by observing that created world, it's sending us information about God and who He is. In fact, he's saying His invisible attributes are clearly seen. He's saying clearly seen, meaning this is not dubious, it's not something that's unclear, it's not something that's cloudy. He's saying anybody that honestly looks at the created world will see that God is behind it. There's a designer behind it. And he said, and so being understood by the things that are made. So you understand a lot. So if we're honest about it, and we look at the created world, and we look at the things around us, it all is proclaiming a designer and a creator behind it. And this was by a statement of someone who doesn't know about DNA and genetics and all these other things. But now, I mean, there's almost no excuse for not believing in God at this point. So let's have a couple of definitions. Science is a systemized knowledge derived from observation, study, and experimentation carried on in order to determine the nature of principles of what is being studied. And I would like to say as we go into this, I love science, and I love weighing evidence. I love having conversations. I love looking at the data. But I think there's oftentimes individuals who simply are not looking at all the data and all the evidence. And sometimes we want to interpret that we may have the same data, but we want to interpret it differently. We want to interpret it based on our worldview rather than the possibility that there may be another way of seeing it. So in that definition of science, today in modern science, that's pretty much been the practice of science since the early days since the inception of science. I mean, as far as modern science as we know it today would be in the probably 1500s. The big assumption within the consensus of modern science today is that there's an underlying philosophy that is attached to that definition. That underlying philosophy is a belief that matter is the only true reality. It is the only true reality in the world, and that everything in the world can be explained only in terms of matter. It is an understanding that the natural world contains everything that is real and of value. And so it's based on that premise when we frame our understanding of science in that basis. What that does is it disqualifies everything from a scientific standpoint that points toward spiritual values or spiritual truth or the reality of God. It's automatically disqualified because we have already excluded that possibility just because that's become part of the definition. It's actually not really, but it's part of the undergirding philosophy behind modern science. Therefore, if the scientific evidence of design points toward an intelligent creator, we are not allowed to go there because of this big assumption. But the challenge to us and to every scientist out there is if the evidence is taking us there, why won't we let it lead us there? Well, the evidence is pointing toward a designer, it's pointing toward a creator. That's what the apostle is saying in Romans. If it is, why won't we let the evidence take us there? You say, well, that's religion. You can't do that. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about science and evidence and where it's taking us. So it's kind of an unfair premise so that we just secularize it to such an extent that we've created a dichotomy in which creation and God and all these things are a dichotomy. There's a chasm of separation between God and Creator and the universe and all these things as far as origins from actual science. So if you start talking about these things over here, well, that's no longer science. I want you to understand that dichotomy is a new thing. All of the founders of modern science did not believe in that dichotomy. They believed that they would let the science take them to the Creator. In fact, it was the Creator that motivated their science. Sir Isaac Newton, if you ask any of you, some of your science students or whatever, ask them, who was the greatest scientist that ever lived? Who will they say? They'll say Sir Isaac Newton. And listen, I've heard people actually criticizing Sir Isaac Newton, and they'll say how sad it is that he wrote more about the Bible and God and theology than he did about science. And they'll say what a waste that was. What a brilliant mind to have wasted so much of it on theology and God. But what they don't understand is the greatness of Sir Isaac Newton was because of his faith in God. And that's the way all of the modern scientists were. I mean, I'm sorry, not modern science. I'm talking about the early founders of modern science. So, for instance, I'll just list some of them. You know, I just said Newton, but Pascal, Boyle, Pasteur, Kelvin, Da Vinci, Mendel, Faraday, Kepler, Bacon, Joule, Steno. There's a long, exhaustive list. That's just names that maybe you know or that you've heard before. And if you look at how they wrote and how they thought, many of them were not only all of these were monotheistic, but many of them were avid Christians and loved the Lord. And the greatness of their science was motivated because they believed that God created the universe with order and that there was a rationale behind it. And so therefore it was up to them to discover the design of what God had created. And it motivated their science. But today it's become a whole different story. We've created this kind of dichotomy. So when we look at questions of belief, there's a lot of, when we look at origins and we look at creation, there's a lot of different positions that people take. One of which is, there's a kind of a cascading of these. Secular atheistic evolution is at the top, and then second to that would be progressive evolution. Secular evolution is first, and then theistic Darwinian evolution, which we talked about. More people are actually in the second category than the first. And then you have progressive creation. So the creationists are divided into two groups today. You have the progressive creationists, and they believe in an old earth, but they're still creationists. And then you have the scientific creationists. These are just the words that have become what describe the groups. The scientific creationists are the ones who believe in a young earth. And within that and within each of these categories, there's variations. It's not like there aren't kind of gray areas going from one to the next. But just to give you an idea, there's a lot of ways to see it, and there's a lot of ways to kind of hammer it out. I am mostly in the fourth category, scientific creationism. But I haven't necessarily, and I'm going to talk about the age of the earth, but I haven't necessarily worked it out like some of my fellow scientific creationists. I maybe have a little bit more latitude, and I talked to one of them recently, a PhD geologist, and I talked to him a while, and I said, listen, man, anyway, I just said, I want to know off the record, just between you and me. Here I am talking to all y'all, but I'm not going to give you his name. I'm not going to give you his name. I'm just saying I want to know, the Bible aside, let's just move the Bible out of the way and look at all of the data as you see it and understand it. I want you to tell me how old you think the earth is. It's a real interesting answer, but I'm not going to tell you because maybe I'll tell you later. I don't know, privately. Now I got you, huh? All right. Seminaries today are confused about this. There are all of these. Just depends. I mean, they really are. But what you need to understand about the creation science movement, it was never led by pastors. It was never led by theologians. It was led by scientists, great scientists, scientists that have PhDs, and there's a lot of them. And all the way back in the 60s and 70s, Henry Morris is one of the first ones who I've talked to personally. And so these guys are brilliant scientists, and I'm going to reference a number of them as we go through this. And they did not get their degrees from, a Christian college or a Christian university. No, they got their degrees from secular universities, and very reputable universities at that. So when we look at evolution, I remember in my geology class, one of the professors, I actually really liked him, and I had a lot of great conversations with him. But he walked in one day into our, I think it was historical geology. I think it's the second class for freshmen. And he walks in and he makes this proclamation. And he says, evolution is a fact. And we're all like, oh, what? Okay, so they've been saying that for a really long time, because that was a while back. So evolution is a fact. There's no discussion. There's no negotiation. There's no, there's nothing. It is just established. It is a fact. It is a fact of science. Of course, you can always have people that want to dispute it or talk with him or whatever. And so since then, I've thought about that a lot. And all of my professors probably would have agreed with him, even a couple of them that were Christian. So, but by and large, my professors were by and large agnostic. So what do they mean when they say evolution's a fact? It's an interesting clip I have from Big Bang Theory that alludes to this idea. It's become very prevalent today. Evolution is a fact.
Sheldon, What are they doing here?
Well, we came to apologize.
Again?
And bring you home. So why don't you pack up your stuff and we'll head back?
No, this is my home now. Thanks to you, my career is over. And I will spend the rest of my life here in Texas trying to teach evolution to creationists.
You watch your mouth, Shelley. Everyone's entitled to their opinion.
Evolution isn't an opinion, it's fact.
And that is your opinion.
I forgive you. Let's go home.
Don't tell me prayer doesn't work.
Okay, so I think some of the confusion comes around when the statement is made, evolution is a fact. They're not necessarily referring to Darwinism. And that's the dirty little secret behind it. But it's made in such a generalized blanket statement that it throws people off, because in their minds they have linked together what I'm going to refer to in a moment, define it, microevolution with macroevolution. And so they blended the two together, but in fact, when they talk about the evidence for evolution, they always have to revert to microevolution. So it's very important to understand the distinguishing here. So if we talk about macroevolution, this is the theory of universal common descent. It is Darwinism. It's a basic theory in modern biology which states that different species of living organisms can ultimately be traced to a single common ancestor. Ultimately, it leads to the conclusion that all forms of life, bacteria, fungi, plants, and animals can be traced back to a single universal common ancestor. Over hundreds of millions of years, life branches from a single species into multiple ones through natural selection. Okay, that is macroevolution. That's classic Darwinism. That's what we're taught, and oftentimes, but if you really have the conversation with someone who's truly science-minded, they would have to still say what I just read is a theory. Okay? But yet it's proclaimed over and over, evolution is a fact. Now, let me read to you what microevolution is. What I want you to understand is every creationist I've ever met believes in this type of evolution, including me. Microevolution means a certain observable small variations, very limited in extent, that occur over a period of time as a species adapts to its surroundings. Okay, so I'm kind of let that sink in. Microevolution, I think a great way to explain this is that the model that I see and that as I understand it, is more of a tree, not a tree, it's more of an orchard. So if you think of this type of tree instead, microevolution would be what you see on the right. We have all kinds of variations that stem off, but there's kind of like boundaries between the different kinds of animals so that they only are able to adapt within a certain framework. And we're going to get more into that when we talk about mutations and natural selection. But I kind of wanted you to get the concept here so you don't think that... A lot of times people think if we're doing a seminar like this that we're against evolution in its entirety, and in fact we're not. It's evolution that any creationist should believe in is the one on the right. The one on the left is the theory of universal descent, which is Darwinian evolution, which we reject. Does that make sense? Hopefully that helps a little bit. I have a quote going all the way back to U.S. News and World Report in 2002, and they were proclaiming then, as they are now, just like you saw in the clip a moment ago, saying that evolution is a fact, that all of the definitions I just mentioned are fact. By now, and here's a couple of quotes, by now, scientists say evolution is no longer just a theory. It's an everyday phenomenon, a fundamental fact of biology, as real as hunger and unavoidable as death. On down, in another quote in that same article, scientists have confirmed virtually all of Darwin's postulates. So when they said that, they were very clearly separating their concept of evolution from microevolution to macroevolution in its entirety. So a lot of what we face today is packaging. I love this. I have a couple of books here. Let me tell you, these are precious. Nobody takes them. This one, I think you can probably get on Amazon for about a penny. The reason is because it was completely dismissed and it was all based on falsity. So what happened is National Geographic became way too eager. There was some evidence coming out of China, and they said, oh, okay, we finally have found the feathered dinosaur. And so we can show a link between birds and theropods. And so they wrote it up, and they created a children's book, Feathered Dinosaurs. And a lot of it is based on tremendous packaging, artwork, imagination, a tremendous amount of imagination. And then this book was discarded and discredited, and of course they had to remove it and no longer sell it. So you can buy them real cheap. I haven't looked in a while, but a number of years ago I looked for it on Amazon. You could get it for 1 penny. Where are they going to make money as the shipping? Then they had an article from National Geographic covering it in great detail. And so once again, National Geographic had to do a kind of a recall on what they had been doing when they found out that the fossils they were building their case on had been fabricated by some of the Chinese paleontologists, because they were also eager to have a great discovery. And so, but what happens is you have the packaging. The packaging and the marketing doesn't necessarily have any bearing on what the truth actually is. And I'm sure there were many people that were reading these at the time that thought, wow, that's really impressive. I mean, it's all true. How can you refute that, right? So I have another clip that to me illustrates marketing from a movie standpoint. It's pretty remarkable to me. It's from a movie called Mission to Mars. Did you ever see that? Watch carefully about how we all got started.
That's where they went.
Look, one stayed behind.
Here it is. Watch carefully. The old double helix.
Earth, before the continents separated.
My God, that's it. Hundreds of millions of years ago, there was a sudden explosion of life on Earth. The first multi-celled plants and animals appeared. No one has ever understood why or how it happened.
So now there is an explanation as to how so much complexity and advanced civilization arose on Earth. It's because there was alien DNA somewhere dropped into our whatever. Okay, so anyway, I mean, it all looks, I mean, I will guarantee you people watch that and went, oh, there it is. It all explains it. And I would just tell you, people will come up with any ridiculous theory, anything except God the Creator. I mean, it's just the way it is. They just will, because people do not want to have to confront the idea of judgment and accountability and the sense of the moral laws and the Bible and all of the things that make them uncomfortable about the Bible and its values, and so on we can go. All of a sudden, we're just suddenly now relieved of all responsibility because it explains it. We don't need God. So I'm going to give you a summary real quick of how evolution works, what the evidence for evolution actually is. Now, this part, probably you shouldn't need it because you should have all been thoroughly indoctrinated by now and know how evolution works, but I'm going to refresh your memory this morning. So how does it actually work? These would be the 5 categories of evidence for evolution. And I'll just tell you, every single time that a presentation is made that's saying evolution, and when I talk about evolution, I'm mainly referring to macroevolution from here on. Everybody understands that. Darwinian evolution. So when we say, what is the evidence for evolution? And every single time, I don't care if you go to a museum or you read a textbook or wherever you go, they will use one of these 5 or a combination of them to say, this is why what we're saying is true. They always have to use these 5. There are no other methods of evidence or a basis of evidence for believing it. So here's what they are. First of all, microevolution, which I just explained. And we're going to go into this more when I talk about mutations and natural selection in a couple of weeks. But the progressive nature of the fossil record. Okay, so what they'll look at and say, well, when you look at the earliest, the deepest rocks, fossils seem simpler. They seem to be, more rudimentary. And as you go up the rock record, you see more complexity as you go. Okay, so that would be evidence for their model. Comparative anatomy is another one. So if you go to the Museum of Science, you'll see a lineup of all kinds of animals, and you'll see their hands or their feet, their bone structure or whatever, and they'll line that up and say, you see, we're all related because you can see the similar anatomy. And so that one's used a lot. So the third one is comparative genomes. Genomes, in other words, the chimpanzee has a similar genome to us, and so therefore we must be related in an evolutionary sense. So that would be one of the areas. Dating methods, and when I say dating methods, we're not talking about the girl you want to meet and trying to figure out, I need some dating methods. No, we're talking about how you measure the progression of time when you look back in ancient history. And it gets a little tricky at times. So those are the 5 areas. Outside of those 5 areas, there is nothing. So what I'm going to do over a period of time is I'm going to essentially show how all 5 of these, one at a time, I'll show you how they all are bankrupt. They do not support evolution in the final analysis. So how the theory actually works, what is the kind of slam dunk argument? This is like the sacred cow of evolution. Without this, they have nothing. Okay, but the mechanism that makes evolution actually work is mutations in combination with natural selection. Without that, there is no means of creating new information by which something can advance. Does that make sense? For something to progress from one kind of animal to an entirely different kind of animal, it has to have more information, advanced information for the creature to progress over time. And the only source they have for new information is either God, but that's out of the question, or is natural selection and combination of mutations. That is the God of evolution. And that is really and truly, that is like their prime directive. And this is what you hear everywhere you go, anytime. It is like the undergirding principle that drives, they'll tell you, it drives biology, it drives the worldview, it drives how we see the world and how it becomes the tinted glasses of reality, is these 2 things. And I'm going to show you why there is no way this mechanism can create advanced or new information or anything else. But that's how it works. That's how they lay it out. When you read and you look at it, you need to kind of look at those 5 things. Okay, they're using number 1, use number 2, whatever. So the implications of evolution when applied to philosophy. Evolution is the logical foundation. It is the rationale. And when I say this, I want you to be very careful and understand that I'm not saying that a person who believes in evolution is any of these things. We should have that screen up already, please, you and mine. So evolution is a logical foundation of naturalism, of atheism, agnosticism, humanism, fascism, Nazism, and communism. Okay? So I know that's a lot to digest, but the links are all there. The connections are all there. And I'm going to give you a clip. This is showing the link between Darwin and eugenics. It shows the link between Nazism and how their philosophy of Nazism was undergirded by a Darwinist viewpoint. If you look at Darwin and his actual writings, you see racism kind of interwoven in there. And so there's a lot of stuff here that's all bundled together. People don't even realize what they're doing. And so let's go ahead and roll that clip.
So I met with the author of From Darwin to Hitler, Dr. Richard Weikart.
Hitler and many of the physicians that carried out this program were very fanatical Darwinists, and particularly they wanted to apply Darwinism to society.
Was wir uns unter der deutschen Jugend der Zukunft wünschen, ist etwas anderes, als was die Vergangenheit sich gewünscht hat. Wir müssen einen neuen Menschen lernen, auf das unser Volk nicht an den typischen Degenerationserscheinungen dieser neuen Zeit runde geht.
Many of these people in the 19-teens, 1920s, who were putting forward some of these ideas about racism were considered the leading scientists. These were Darwinists who were taken seriously by fellow academics. It's not to say that all academics believed it.
These leading academics, were there any of them who were Americans?
There were plenty of Americans who were saying similar kinds of things.
Not only were Americans saying such things, they were pioneers in this fledgling science known as eugenics. They thought they could help evolution along by sterilizing the so-called feeble-minded and prohibiting them from getting married.
Physician. All right, so if we take this to its logical conclusion, you might end up with what they ended up in a museum in the Humans Zoo exhibit. This was in 2005, but I think it was in Britain. And the headline was, "Crowds Go Ape Over Humans Zoo Exhibit." So this was supposed to be humans in a natural habitat where they had ostensibly evolved into this place of pure harmony with nature. And I don't know about you, but I'm glad I'm not in pure harmony with nature, because when it gets really hot and sticky in the summer here, I'm glad I walk into an air-conditioned house, aren't you? And so crowds, there were a number of things they said in this article. It's fascinating. He says, there was a warning, a sign that was out in front. It said, "Warning, humans in their natural environment. Read the sign at the entrance to the exhibit." Read the sign. Visitors stopped to point and laugh, and several children could be heard asking, "Why are there people in there?" Seeing people in a different environment amongst other animals teaches members of the public that the human is just another primate. That was part of the article. That's what they were saying about the exhibit. A lot of people think humans are above other animals, he told the Associated Press. When they see humans as animals, here it kind of reminds us that we're not that special. Okay, so you have to understand how we view animals, all these things. The Bible has a very particular view about the difference between human beings and animals. There's a chasm of difference. And we see what in Genesis 1, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the livestock, over all the earth and all the creatures that move along the ground." And so man was meant to have dominion over the earth. And so, in other words, some of these evolutionary ideas lead to absurdities, like the zoo exhibit. So, why do origins matter? Have you ever wondered why you're here? Why you're here on this planet, in this country? Do you sense that you have a calling? Do you have a sense within that you are here for a purpose? That longing that somehow your life should count for something? Don't you have that? Or are you just a product of impersonal forces of time and chance, mutations and natural selection? And here it is, we produced you, voila. And so Proverbs 23:7 says, for as he thinks in his heart, so is he. In other words, if we indoctrinate an entire generation of young people that they are nothing but animals, why would we be shocked to find out that they start to behave and act like animals, as amoral, immoral beings? It's all connected, and it begins to lean or lend itself toward our framework and our worldview and how we see reality, and what we will justify or not justify. So what I want to do now is I'm going to look at intelligent design. We're going to look at 3 aspects of intelligent design. Intelligent design is not a new idea, as I just mentioned from Romans. Basically, that was a statement of intelligent design that Paul was saying, that you can look at the created world and you see God. You can see it by its design. David said it in the Old Testament. He says, look at the human in our design. He says, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. So this is not a new idea. But I'm thinking, I was with when our kids were small, we were hiking in Colorado, and there was one of those beautiful rivers that just clear, and there were like 4 boulders, and they were all in a row. And on this end of the boulder was a trail that kept going, and this leading up to them was a trail here. So you had a trail, 4 boulders, and a trail. So I asked my kids, I said, so do you think it was just a coincidence that these 4 boulders were put here? I mean, it's just kind of like the river just kind of coincidentally left them here and just kind of conveniently in this order? Or do you think that somebody humanly put them here? And I said, and are you sure? And they were all absolutely certain that those 4 boulders, or was it 3 boulders, or whatever it was, that they were there on purpose, that someone had imposed design on the created world and the natural world. And you know what? There's not a person in this room that wouldn't think that. That you would walk up to those 4 boulders and you would say to yourself, those were put there those were obviously someone human, an intelligent person, put those 4 boulders there. And you're looking at something of the most rudimentary, simple order, but we all know instinctively that there's order to this, there's design to it. And how dare we go to much more complex designs and say, oh, it's all a result of natural forces and mutations and natural selection, and given enough time, anything can happen. And so, really, I think that we're going to face a judgment, in a sense, over this, because so many people that are hypocritical, they say, well, yeah, I believe all this is evolutionary related, but yet when it comes to basic life, we know instinctively certain things are there because someone humanly, intelligently placed it there. I have another clip. Actually, I have 7 clips. This is number 5. So,
the second we're there, and leave the yellow frequency where it is. Stay on it, fish. Don't let it get away. If you lose it, just scan the band. Run every frequency you can think of. How you doing? Talk to me, guys.
Partially polarized set of moving pulses, amplitude modulated.
Relax. Systems check out, signal across the board. What's the frequency?
4.4623 gigahertz. Hydrogen times pi. Told you.
Strong sucker, too.
I got it. I'm patched in.
All right, let me hear it. Listen to that. Make me a liar, fish.
It could be AWACS out of Kirtland jamming us, but I'm doubting it.
All right, let's see if Fudd's reading it too. Willie, patch it back and give me the off axis. Are we recording?
Never stopped.
Thank you, Elmer.
AWACS status is negative.
What about White Sands?
On this frequency, no.
I'm gonna punch up the darks. How's the spine tonight, guys? Come on. All right.
NORAD's not tracking any snoops in this vector. Shuttle Endeavor's in sleep mode.
Okay, point source confirmed. Whatever it is, it ain't local.
Position?
I checked it.
Okay, so, interesting. I mean, you watch a movie like this, you're just going with it, right? But the idea is that there's this thumping noise coming from outside of our solar system. And so based on this rhythmic thumping, they conclude that it's some type of intelligence communicating with us. But there again is a rudimentary example of order or intelligence that is not very immaculate at all. It's just a simple thumping, right? And yet the conclusion is, oh my goodness, because we never get anything like this from outer space. It's obviously alien communication. And so the first thing I want us to look at with intelligent design is irreducible complexity. And so when you look at, to kind of explain the concept, a mousetrap is a great way to do it. This is, somebody said, that's not a mousetrap, that's something else. That's, yeah, so the idea is that this mousetrap has what, 5 parts to it? And if you remove any part of this mousetrap, it has no function. And so if we were talking about evolution, there would be nothing for natural selection to act on because there would be no functionality to it. In other words, this is down to its most basic components for it to be functional as a trap. And so what is it? You got a spring, the lever, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the wood, 5. I guess it's 5 parts. So I know you want to see it work, right? I don't seem to have any way to do it. Here. Oh, man. Oh, look at that. It chopped her pen. Look at that. Don't you care about mice? Oh, man. That's tough. God's creatures. Sometimes I'll see somebody kill a roach or something. I go, you doing that to God's creature? I mean, look at that thing. I mean, it's like designed, and you're killing it. You know, when you look at the rock record, roaches are like this big. Maybe bigger. I don't remember. It's like this big. Stuff is bigger and better in the old days. Dragonfly wingspans were like this. So, all right. So I had a car. My first car was a Triumph Spitfire, 1965, 66. It's a really old car, but man, it was super cool. A little sports car, European. And so my dad and I had to take that engine apart, and then we had to put it all back together, and the car was running and everything's working, and we had parts left over. We never could figure out where those parts went. So here's what I'm trying to say is that the Spitfire was not irreducibly complex. In other words, there were certain parts to the car that may have had some sort of function, but they weren't essential for the actual functioning. So it had not been reduced down to its irreducible complexity like a mousetrap. So that's just to kind of help you. So when you look at, for instance, the cell, or you look at some of these nano machines, and we're going to see a little more of that in a moment, but you probably have learned this in college already or in school at some point. But does anybody have any idea how many cells are in the human body? Anybody? Huh? Too many? Nobody? No guess? No. Do we have any biology majors here? I know there's a few. 40 billion. It's a lot more than that. Trillion. 100 trillion. I know it's incomprehensible. You're sitting there going, what's even a trillion? What's a billion? So within all of those cells, each cell are thousands of nano machines. Okay. Just think about it a second. That's you walking around. Aren't I cool? I am 100 trillion cells right now. And every one of them has thousands of nano machines. And so you go, well, so we're going to look at one of these nano machines. The bacterial flagellum is an example of irreducible complexity. And you probably know what the one on the right is. There's another type of flagellum. It's also irreducibly complex. But when you look at the bacterial flagellum, the one on the left, it has a rotary motor, and it has the following features. It has a feature for self-assembly and repair. It has a water-cooled rotary engine. It has a proton motive force drive system. It has forward and reverse gears. It operates at speeds of up to 100,000 RPM. It has direction reversing capability within 1/4 of a turn. It is hardwired signal transduction system with short-term memory. Okay, so that's the bacterial flagellum. And you want to kill them. Okay, so here's the thing. It is irreducibly complex. And what that means is if you remove any component of the device, the machine, it cannot function. In fact, it's just tissue. It has there's nothing for natural selection to act on. It just has no, in other words, I want to make sure you understand this. There is no transitional predecessor possible. Since anything less complex is disorganized and useless. There is no permission for a transitional form of that creature or that device any more than we could have something transitional leading up to a mousetrap. It's useless without all of its components. Does that make sense? And I mean, you could use the mousetrap as a paperweight, I guess, without parts. Okay, so here's a quote from a scientist, Michael Behe, PhD, professor of biochemistry from the Department of Biological Science in Lehigh University. He said this regarding this characteristic. An irreducibly complex system cannot be produced directly by numerous successive slight modifications of a precursor system, because any precursor to an irreducibly complex system that is missing a part is by definition non-functional. Since natural selection can only choose systems that are already working, then if a biological system cannot be produced gradually, it would have to arise as an integrated unit in one fell swoop for natural selection to have anything to act on. Hopefully you all are understanding this concept. If something is irreducibly complex, then there exists no possible functional intermediate for it. Next thing, design and nature. We're talking about intelligent design. You can look at nature and you can see these phenomenal designs. I grew up reading Charlotte's Web, and I knew there was a spider that could spell into the web in English. What did it say? Something like some pig or something. Okay. So the design in nature, you can look at all kinds of things. The human eye, the ear, the knee. You know, I was in orthopedics for years. The knee, navigation, bees, birds, on and on we go. I can spend a lot of time on each one of those and just look at how phenomenal these things are. But I'm going to look at one thing. And the reason I'm going to look at, well, I'm going to look at several things, but as far as right now, I'm going to look at photosynthesis. And the reason is because my professor, the same one that came in and said evolution is a fact, he was in the middle of describing photosynthesis. He wrote this formula on the board. He has a PhD in paleontology. He puts this formula on the board, and he says, I'm good with evolution. I'm good with it all the way up to this point right here. And right here, I just cannot see how this evolved. And I thought, I really appreciate his honesty. He says, I'm just stuck right there. Because what do you have? You have carbon dioxide. Y'all know what this formula is saying, right? Carbon dioxide, 6 parts of CO2 with 6 parts of water, plus light. And what do you get? On the right-hand side, you get food. Carbohydrates. Sugar. And he just baffled by that, the chemistry of it, the phenomenal nature of this formula. And so within the plant cell, there are chloroplasts. I know you want a science lesson, but I'll move through this pretty quick. A chloroplast, if we could get that screen, please, thank you. The chloroplast, as you can see, is very complex. Sunlight energy is trapped by chlorophyll and converted first into electrical, then into chemical energy, which is temporarily stored. These compounds are later used as fuel to power the light-independent fixation of CO2 into sugars. Chloroplasts, these organelles, are usually disc-shaped and can reorient themselves in the cell to vary their exposure to sunlight. These are pretty cool. They're like, oh, sunlight's a little weird, we can optimize. Oh, it's moving. We got a little sunlight over here. We want to optimize. We got to produce food. We got to take water, and we're going to take carbon dioxide, and we got sunlight. Here we go. Okay, so, and we're going to create food. And there's about 100 of these in one plant cell. I mean, you just have to look at that and go, really? I mean, what mechanism of evolution could ever create something like this? Especially when you understand how the mechanism is a failed mechanism. It's ridiculous. Man has professed to be wise to become fools. The next thing we'll look at is genetic complexity. These are the three things. The complexity of the cell. Before I play this clip, actually, let's play the clip first. This shows all the nano machines and so forth within the cell and how they interact.
Thought a cell was, say, a mud hut. What do we now know that a cell is?
More complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the two helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make protein. We have information in a one-dimensional form that provides the information for a three-dimensional form.
I'm finally just beginning to grasp the complexity of the cell. Are there systems within the cell that go well beyond Darwinian evolution? Some type of cellular technology that drives adaptation, replication, quality control, and repair? What if these new mechanisms have massive design implications? Well, I say, so be it.
The cell All right, so I'm going to read you a little thing from an article called The Biologist, and it was in a newspaper. The microbiologist says, I'm a bit like an editor trying to find a spelling mistake inside a document larger than 4 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. The interviewer says, do you believe the information evolved? The microbiologist says, George, nobody I know in my profession believes it evolved. It was engineered by a genius beyond genius. And such information could not have been written any other way. The paper and ink did not write the book. Knowing what we know, it is ridiculous to think otherwise. Interviewer, have you ever stated that in a public lecture or in any public writings? He says, no, I just say it evolved. To be a molecular biologist requires one to hold on to 2 insanities at all times. 1, it would be insane to believe in evolution when you can see the truth for yourself. 2, it would be insane to say that you don't believe in evolution. All government work, research grants, papers, big college lectures, everything would stop. I'd be out of a job or relegated to the outer fringes where I couldn't earn a decent living. I hate to say it, but that sounds intellectually dishonest. The biologist says, the work I do in genetic research is honorable. We will find the cures to many of mankind's worst diseases, but in the meantime, we have to live with the elephant in the living room. What elephant? He said, creation design is like an elephant in the living room. It moves around, takes up an enormous amount of space, loudly trumpets, bumps into us, knocks things over, eats tons of hay, and smells like an elephant, yet we have to swear that it isn't there. So the question to all of us, if the scientific evidence of design points toward an intelligent creator, then why would we not let it lead us there? The genome is a complete set of genetic instructions contained in the cell. We all have that. Every single cell in your body, the trillions that you have, each one of those cells individually contains the complete genome. All the instructions for who you are as a human being are in that single cell and multiplied trillions of times in your body. The genome set of instructions, I'm quoting another geneticist, John Sanford, PhD. He says the genome set of instructions is not a simple, static, linear array of letters, but is dynamic, self-regulating, and multidimensional. There's no human information system that can even begin to compare to it. The genome's highest levels of complexity and interaction are probably beyond the reach of our own understanding. So each cell has to divide, it has to replicate. And when it does, it has to take all that information and duplicate it. And we have to have that process or we wear out. So cells wear out, and so they have to create new cells, new fresh replicas. And so we are walking around replicas, each one of us. I know sometimes we wish maybe our cells would replicate a little differently. Why is it if it's replicating, am I getting a little worse instead of a little better? It's called aging. So this is an interesting statement. It's from the National Human Genome Research Institute. It's a government website. And the question is, what does my genome look like? If all the DNA from a single human cell was stretched out end to end, it would make a 6-foot-long strand comprised of a 6 billion letter code. It's hard to imagine how that much DNA can be packed into a cell's nucleus, which is so small it can only be seen with a specialized microscope. The secret lies in the highly structured and tightly packed nature of the genome. So I was trying to picture this. Okay, so you take the DNA and you stretch it out. Little tiny. Okay, so first of all, so you think of it like a little chain. Okay, so we're going to stretch that DNA out. We're going to stretch out 6 feet. That would be like almost as tall as me. So from here to there, 6 feet. And it's saying that in that 6 feet distance are billions of coding. Billions of letters of coding. And then you have to imagine, okay, so how small is that tiny little, if we're picturing a strand of DNA, how tiny would it be? And it's like, it's not the width of a hair. It would be many, many times smaller than a width of hair. You couldn't see it. You'd only see it with an electron microscope. It would be so tiny, you wouldn't know it was even here. You would just walk over it. It wouldn't even be a cobweb. You follow? It is so tiny. The human genome, I had to do a lot of research to figure this out because it keeps changing year to year. But I finally found MIT, and I thought, okay, MIT has a website they're addressing it. So I thought, I'll go with MIT. And so I thought they're pretty reputable, and the reason they were addressing this issue of how much information is contained in the genome inside the DNA is because they're trying to figure out how to store the information. So the idea is that a human, an individual, a person, would like to take their genome and preserve it. They like to save it. And so they're running the numbers. They're going, okay, well, so how much storage do we need to save an entire human's genome on a disk? What would it take? I mean, disk space is getting cheaper, so we want to be able to put an entire person on a disk drive. And they're doing it, okay? You have to understand, this is not theoretical now. It's something they're actually doing. To me, it's a little scary. And so MIT said this. They said that concerning the human genome, they said it would require 100 gigabytes of uncompressed storage for one person. Okay, 100 gigabytes. But think about that, because that means that basically 100 gigabytes, every time a cell replicates, it's essentially replicating that much information. So it takes a few hours for your cells to replicate. You don't even know what's happening. You just had a cell duplicate. Okay, by tomorrow morning, who knows how many cells in your trillions just successfully replicated flawlessly without error. Errors are mutations. So there's all these safeguards to make sure that this replica is accurate. So over and over and over and over again, we replicate ourselves accurately. So you have to think, how many books? See, I had an old reference and it said 1,000 books. But once I understood they're talking about 100 gigabytes of information, we're actually talking about thousands, tens of thousands of books. So imagine tens of thousands of books, this much information, say a biology textbook, and you take tens of thousands of these books, and that being essentially the information that has to be replicated in that, what did I say, 100 gigabytes of storage. And they're like, no problem, we can save the entire genome of a single person. Just give us 100 gigabytes of storage, and they're actually writing down how much profit they can make and how much it would cost per gigabyte. And they figure, we think this could be very profitable. You're welcome. I can give you the website later if you want to look at it. 1 gigabyte is about 3,000 books, if that helps. Digital DNA is the other thing that's kind of cool, maybe a little scary. The similarity of DNA code and computer programming is uncanny. ATCG, right? Those are the letters of the code of the DNA. We use in our computers 0 and 1. So for us to tie into the alien technology, we must convert our zeros and ones into ATCG. Those are the 4 letters of the DNA molecule. So the discovery, this is Stephen Meyer, he's a PhD. He's a big ID guy. He says the discovery that DNA codes information in a digital form points decisively back to prior intelligence. Microsoft, already 4 years ago, they were buying 10 million strands of DNA from biology startup Twist Bioscience to investigate the use of genetic material to store data. The data density of DNA is orders of magnitude higher than conventional storage systems. With 1 gram, hear this, 1 gram of DNA able to represent close to 1 billion terabytes, or 1 zettabyte. I know you want to know that, of data. DNA is also remarkably robust. DNA fragments thousands of years old have been successfully sequenced. Okay, so they have to use dead DNA to create storage, but it's still biologic. It's still a designed storage unit from nature, from God. So if they use a living DNA molecule, it will see that foreign information and it will start erasing it. It's like, no, you can't put that in here. That's not part of the system. That's not part of the machinery. So they have to kind of trick nature, if you will. So I'm gonna conclude with this last clip. It's an interview with Richard Dawkins, who you may be familiar with him, but he is fairly hostile to Christians. He is a very avid atheist, a very vocal atheist. So listen to this interview with Dawkins, and it's really, really interesting. You think that clip I showed you earlier was silly? From Mission to Mars.
Believed in a God of infinite lovingness and kindness and forgiveness and generosity, sort of like the modern day God. Why spoil it for them? Why not just let them have their fun and enjoy it?
I mean, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. I write a book, people can read it if they want to. I believe that it is a liberating thing to free yourself from primitive superstition.
So religion is a primitive superstition?
I think it is, yes.
So you believe it's liberating to tell people that there is no God?
I think a lot of people, when they give up God, feel a great sense of release and freedom.
Why do you think that? I mean, what's your dad? What's your scientist? What's your dad?
I think, well, I've had a lot of letters saying that, and I've...
There are 8 billion people in the world, Dr. Dawkins. How many letters have you had?
No, I haven't done that. That's quite true.
Professor Dawkins seemed so convinced that God doesn't exist that I wondered if he would be willing to put a number on it.
Well, it's hard to put a figure on it, but I mean, I'd put it as something like, 99% against or something.
Well, how do you know it's 99%
I
against,
don't.
say, and not 97%?
No, I did. You asked me to put a figure on it, and I'm not comfortable putting a figure on it. I think I just think it's very unlikely.
What? But you couldn't put a number on it?
No, of course not.
So it could be 49%.
Well, it would be. I mean, I think it's unlikely, but it's quite far from 50%.
How do you know?
I don't know. I mean, I put an argument in the book.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God. So that
So, so now you see the clip from earlier, Mission to Mars. People actually believe that. So, again, anything but God. It's a form of rebellion against God and His goodness and His word and His truth. And but the evidence is so strong. And so it's so important for us to really have a grasp. Next week, we're going to look at the fossil record. We're going to look at what's really there. It's getting into my favorite part, is I like to talk about geology. Why does the fossil record not support evolution? I mean, I'm just telling you right now, it does not support evolution. I've actually dug around for that. How many of y'all have actually gone out and dug for fossils? Let me see your hands. Oh, okay. You have some of them with you? No, okay. Bring them next week. I want to see them. Well, if you found anything any good, just show me what you got. I like to see your fossils. So let's stand together. We'll go ahead and close here in a moment. Thank you for just being so attentive tonight and coming. If you're new or you've just visiting, I want to invite you, as we did earlier, to attend. Come visit our church Sunday. If you don't already have a church, we'd love to have you. And I'm going to be teaching on who is the real Jesus. And I guess I'm just on a controversial role right now, because we're going to look at it, we're going to drill down, we're going to dig into the scriptures, and we're going to look at the New Testament. Was Jesus a socialist? Yeah, you want to come for that, believe me. Okay. So, that's one of many we're going to hit. Who is the real Jesus? It's actually a pretty fun series. So, all right. Lord, we just thank you tonight. Just the amazing creation. Just, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And you've designed us to be in harmony and friendship with our Creator, not in hostility toward Him. Lord, I pray for anybody here this evening that, for whatever reason, has been estranged or distant from you. But God, what a wonderful thing to know that the Creator of the universe reaches for us. He welcomes us. The fact that, Lord, you would convict us by your Spirit is actually love on your part. So we just thank you for being personal in such a majestic creation, that you loved us so much. You gave your own Son for us. We commit this time to you in the name of Jesus. Amen.